I'm Ekaterina, the co-founder of Future London Academy. We're going to talk about insights from Future Branding Week. So a lot of you probably know that every summer we run an event called Future Branding Week, where I visit different agencies and learn from their teams, what they do, what they're working on, what they're excited about. And this year we visited DixonBaxi, Pentagram, Output, DesignBridge, Monzo, lots and lots of great companies. And today I will be sharing my insights, what I found personally useful, interesting, different, surprising. So things that I think might be worth discussing with all of you. So hopefully you will find them useful as well. And obviously throughout that week, we also met a lot of incredible people. I know some of them might be on a call today. So special hello to everyone who joined us and went to all these wonderful companies together and enjoyed our time together. So today I'll cover 5 things: the power of strategy, the power of motion, the power of language, the power of code, and the power of community. And we'll begin with a strategy, as everything begins with a strategy. And specifically, I wanted to share with you first insight from Pearlfisher, who shared their overall branding process and how they approach something from brief to delivery, and what does it look like in terms of step-by-step process. So I will share the example they shared with us, which is a client, a botanical water company, came to them and asked to create a premium brand. So what did they do? So their process looks like this. They start with something called futures. So they have their separate department team that works in this kind of whole idea of future. So they research what's going on in the industry, they look at trends, they look at what's changing, what's new, what's interesting, and they provide all of these insights to the rest of their team and organization to make sure that they can use all of these wonderful insights in their branding projects. So specifically to this botanical water brand, some of the trends or futures that they discovered is about the rise of low alcohol volume brands. So low alcohol brands are on the rise because there is more conscious drinking. Yeah, there is a healthy new generation growing up that not necessarily is very passionate about spending evenings in the pubs. So they all very conscious about what they drink, why they drink, and where they drink. And flavored water is already a proliferated category. So there are many brands that are coming out of that trend and actually providing some sparkling or non-sparkling, non-alcoholic solutions, flavored water and stuff like that. And overall drinking this purpose is a thing. So from there, they move to their pressing needs. So, okay, now we know that, then how can we think about what is the question we're trying to answer here? And the question they pose is, what do you drink when you're not drinking? Which is a wonderful question that I think all of us a lot of times found ourselves asking when we joined a crew of drinkers in a pub, and then you're not necessarily feel like drinking. So what do you do? What do you drink when you're not drinking? So based on that, they re-articulated the brief specifically for this company. And they thought, what if we created the world's first non-alcoholic distilled spirit? So again, that's something that back then wasn't even a category. So they were thinking, okay, let's try something new, something different. And in terms of brand essence, they thought that because it's, again, distilled, obviously it's a lot about flora, botanicals. So they thought of celebrating the art of nature, uniting flora and fauna. And from there, they moved to visual inspiration. So knowing all of this, what does it mean in terms of visual inspiration? And obviously, William Morris, John James Audubon, and other people came to mind in terms of artists and creators that have this very much floral, kind of celebrating nature, very craftsmanship style and visual. So from there, they started exploring design and obviously sketching, and they showed us many more images that they just incredibly special. And I admire people who have so much passion for craft and beauty in illustration, in design, in typography. And it was just gorgeous to see the whole process of literally putting it together piece by piece, which obviously evolved to this brand. And I'm sure a lot of you already kind of figured out what the brand is. And The brand was Seedleap, and I'm sure a lot of you seen it. Definitely in the UK, it's quite a famous one. And seriously, when I saw it in a store, I didn't know what it is, but I just wanted to buy it because it looked beautiful. And again, that very, very special, intricate illustration makes it just even more attractive. You kind of buy it for the bottle, and then you figure out, actually, the drink is nice enough as well. And obviously, they created the whole story around, and kind of everything from the visual sense follow this whole thread of craftsmanship, of celebrating nature and art, and just beauty in general. Moving on to another company called Uncommon, another wonderful design agency that is based here in London. They have similar approach to creating a brand, slightly different steps, but again, you'll probably see similarities in it. And they very much start with research as well. So they learn to listen, they try to understand, again, the market, the client, everything else that is going on, and they move to purpose and positioning from there. They try to understand everything about the product and forget it, which is a great way to have a fresh start. From there, they build belief system and move to translation. So what makes the cut? And there they develop brand behaviors. So again, something very specific to the brand. How does the brand behave? What does it mean in terms of specifically branding? And from there, they form a design brief, which will include some graphic anchors, like, again, some visual elements that actually will form the overall identity and overall brand. And from there on, they obviously move to the assets and put it into actions and everything else that need to happen to make the brand. But specifically, I wanted to focus on one part that I found very interesting about Uncommon. And they have this idea of tension and fame. And I found it's quite cool. And obviously, when something is phrased so nicely, you kind of remember it immediately. And this is basically the kind of the main seed of brand identity or branding that they create. So first, they find tension. And this particular example is for a mortgage company. And the tension that they found, getting a mortgage is hell. I think a lot of you who ever tried to get a mortgage would agree. Now, tension response. How does the brand respond to this tension? Habito, which is the brand that they worked with, takes the hell out of getting a mortgage. So it's a lovely way to respond to our tension. So therefore, the brand world is all about hell or Habito. And those of you who've seen the brand, probably seen that it's very much follows that kind of idea of hell versus Habito, and kind of very different visual style for a mortgage brand, and kind of clearly articulating this very different approach to mortgages, but also overall kind of making it lighter and kind of opposite to hell, opposite to struggle, opposite to everything bad that usually you have associated with getting a mortgage. And it's beautifully translated across all the assets, from digital to social to graphics to everything else that they produced for Habito. So I loved how they just distilled something to this kind of tension and fame, and from tension you kind of create this fame. Another interesting insight from related to strategy was from DixonBaxi. And that specific one I really liked because they talked about kind of the audience that is not your customers. And I feel like, especially if you work in the industry for a long time and you kind of have your own process of interviewing your audience, interviewing your customers, and kind of understanding what they like, what they want, everything, you sometimes forget about this whole circle of people that are not your customers, but are potential audience. So how kind of their statement was that how everyone feels about your brand is meaningful, regardless of where they are actually your customers or not. And a great kind of summary of that is REI is not everything, create relationship, not transactions. To give you an example of what it is, football clubs are a great example. Not everyone supports a certain football club. So they created Everton's brand, and not everyone is a fan of Everton, but a lot of people know about Everton, so therefore the brand is very, very relevant to non-customers. So you really need to understand how non-customers see your brand. And they also made some provocative statement that you need to love the haters. And I think specifically with football teams, it makes so much sense, because I think football fans can be very emotional about the team that they love and the team that they hate. But that hate, that's what generates even more love from the other team. So I think that kind of, again, tension between your customers and people who love and like super fans, and kind of the overall audience who knows about your brands is very, very important. So I think the learning from here is, don't sometimes close yourself just focusing on your customers. Everyone who communicates with your brand, everyone who interacts with your brand, so knows about your brand, also forms an opinion, and that opinion can be used either to grow your brand, or it can be quite if you don't utilize it well, then you kind of, it's a missed opportunity. So that was on strategy, and we are moving on to the second item on the menu, which is motion. And it kind of follows nicely, because some of the things that have been articulated by other companies like DixonBaxi, and kind of articulating this one piece that is very important for a brand, actually applies very well to motion. And just to give you an idea of what brands are doing currently in motion, this is a wonderful example from Studio Output, who did branding for Cuckoo. And Studio Output specifically focuses on digital experiences, and especially motion in digital. And I feel like that's such a unique thing as well, talking about the future of branding. It's very underutilized part of branding at the moment, probably because it's quite hard to put together, and also it requires a lot of effort and resources, but it can really create a very, very special feeling about your brand, especially now that everything is online. And in online, you can have so many opportunities for really micro interaction, micro motions that really, really create a certain feeling about how something feels when you touch it, even though that is a click rather than a real touch. So how slow, how fast it is, or how bouncy, or how fluid, everything really creates this special emotion about the brand online. So Studio Output has kind of this focus on motion language, and how they talk about it. Motion language is all about creating a characterful brand. So you need to consider it through functional and expressive moments. So the idea here is also not to overpower the function with motion, because if you just do crazy animations everywhere, they might look fun when you present them to the client. There will be like hell to every user that tries to interact with your app or website or whatever that is. So you really need to pick your battles where it's a functional and where it's an expressive moment. For example, I don't know if any of you use Asana, but when you tick off something on Asana, there are lovely unicorns flying around. And that's a wonderful moment where you're not in a rush, you tick something off, so you have this extra moment for expression. While if you're trying to quickly go, I don't know, purchase something, or maybe, I don't know, check something off or do something quickly, then maybe overpowering something with motion is not the best use of this expressiveness. Obviously, it needs to be brand informed. So as with all the characteristics we discussed, like this kind of golden thread or special thing that you talk about in terms of brand, it also applies to motion. So whatever you decide to do with your overall visual style, obviously that applies to any sort of assets, including motion design. Consider conventions beyond the category, get inspiration from other places. So definitely, I think there is a lot of fame happening like in each category, because everyone looks around and kind of sees that if that brand did A, then you kind of try to copy. So definitely go beyond the category and look for these special things elsewhere. Balance creativity with consistency. I think that applies to any branding in general, but specifically in motion, I think there is always an opportunity to go crazy creative, but sometimes you need really, really good guidelines and structure to make sure it's actually consistent across. And obviously the character is very, very important, again, in brands overall and branding overall, but specifically in motion, there is so much opportunity for character, because again, that's something that is animated. So there is so much more that you can do to portray certain emotion or character in the brand. And the way they do it is actually very related to, again, how we discuss the overall strategy. So they talk about that you need to describe what the brand is like and distill it into 3 adjectives. So an example of that would be for Mixcloud, which I'm sure you've seen, one of the really beautiful brands designed by Studio Output. They distilled the brand to brave, connected, and empathic. They obviously do the whole research and workshop around it. They didn't just come up with 3 words on the spot. But I think it's really nice to distill something that is very complex, that, again, as designers, we sometimes overcomplicate how we talk about brands, that maybe becomes very difficult for the rest of the organization to comprehend and use. So distilling it to 3 very certain words that create this very unique combination of character is very important. And again, Mixcloud is a brand. It has like wonderful, obviously, animations that you can say there. Again, in terms of colors, in terms of animation, they're very much all about being connected, being empathic, and being brave. This is another example, again, bionic, clear, and powerful. Again, you kind of can see that that is very, very different visual style. And another example, a knowledgeable, tribalizing, and exciting. So again, there are there is wonderful sense of excitement coming through this brand, and again, but it's much calmer to portray the knowledgeable aspect of it, so it's not too crazy, not too mad. It's very much a combination of these 3 very distilled characteristics that they picked. So go with animation, go with motion. I think that is the future, and definitely a lot for all of us to experiment. I think the top advice also from Studio Output was think of it from the beginning, not at the end. I think it's always easy to like sprinkle it on top after the whole brand exercise is done and you release the brand and you go to animate or someone special, like, and now can you please add animation? And we all know how any creative will hate that. So if you are thinking about motion, if you want to make your brand really future focused, definitely think about it from the beginning, from the brief. When you do distill these words, when you do think about the strategy, then you can really start building this up from the very beginning together with all other assets that you build. The next topic that I wanted to share with you is about language. And I know we talk about the future branding, and language, I suppose, has been there for a while, but I feel like we sometimes, again, as creatives, forget the power of language and how much actually just pure words communicate to us, and brands can definitely utilize that power to grow, to communicate certain emotion or certain behavior. And we had a wonderful presentation from Harry from Monzo. And those of you who know Monzo, it's one of the fintech companies, and they are very well known for very, very good copywriting and writing in general. So Harry actually talked about the power of good writing, and the examples that he brought this was one example of a sign that you can see on the street somewhere: pedestrian casualty reduction signal timing experiment. By the way, this is one sentence for those of you who thought maybe there are 5 unrelated things. So someone clearly at some organization decided that somehow this explains something important. It's yellow and big, it must be important. So whatever it is, I don't think anyone understood what it is, because it was written by someone who clearly is very within their own terminology, their own world of what needs to be said, and trying to say it very quickly, and whatever the decision-making process was there, clearly didn't do the job. Here's the opposite example. If you hit this sign, you will hit that bridge. How about that? I think everyone can understand what this means. And sometimes there is this fear of oversimplifying things because you won't sound clever enough. And especially with brands and branding, especially brands who want to be serious and kind of, especially if you're a finance organization like Monzo, you better be serious. You can't be just plain English. But their whole point is actually that there is a universal truth that every audience prefers things to be easier to understand. And it's and simpler writing is more persuasive. And I think we sometimes try to like hide behind the terminology and to make sure that, I don't know, it's definitely understood or it's definitely right or we definitely sound a certain way. The truth is everyone likes simpler writing, all of us included. We saw the 2 signs, which one would we pick? we always pick the second. And the same comes with the brand. If the brand can communicate themselves in a simple way, it will be more persuasive, people will trust it more. And another very good point, we all skim read everything all the time. So if you want to say something, better say it in a very easy way so people do actually understand it, otherwise they won't read anything. And the trick is being no more complicated than we have to be. For that, there is actually a tool that you can use where you can actually check how complicated your language is, and it's called readability test. So you can check this website, the URL is at the top, and basically you can put your text and it will tell you whether it will be understood by humans, or that's more of a Google Translate kind of situation that cannot be understood by anyone but AI. So very good way to check your own writing. To prove the point about the simple writing, there was actually the whole research done, and the research was called Consequences of Erudite Vernacular Utilized Irrespective of Necessity, Problems with Using Long Words Needlessly. I think beautiful piece of research. And basically all it kind of says that, yeah, true, people like simpler writing, even lawyers like simpler writing. Even if you're a judge, you will be more convinced by the arguments that actually are simpler to understand than lawyer kind of jargon and language, which is very surprising, but it's true. Monzo themselves, they have a wonderful tone of voice guidelines that I would recommend everyone checking out if you ever consider thinking about better writing and how other brands do it. It's publicly available. And you can see what kind of things, how they describe it. As you can see, the whole guidelines are very much in a simple tone of voice and very straightforward. And Harry also said an interesting kind of thought that if you cannot write your terms and conditions in that tone of voice that you're trying to do, then this is not the right tone of voice. So basically, even their terms and conditions of a financial institution, which is a hard one, are written in very plain English that people can understand. So yeah, definitely think of easier writing, take inspiration from someone like Monzo. Kind of the final piece of advice from Harry was, think about the content first. So his opinion is clear and concise. Is it obvious who is responsible, what the time frames are, whatever content you try to give to people, is it clear what needs to be done? Structure is the finding recommendation right up front. So for example, if there is like a 5-page document, make sure that the main thing is at the top, so people who just landed on the page can quickly find what they were looking for. Is the key info is easy to take in at a glance, again, from structuring headlines to like paragraphs to everything else, to make it very easy to skim read something and find the right information for yourself. And obviously tone, talking about branding, I think tone of voice is key here. And but also we need to make sure that the language is easy to follow. Like, can we actually read what's written? And is there any unnecessary jargon or technicality? So maybe ask someone to read it for you who is not in your industry, to make sure that they can understand it. But also, as I shared, the readability test is a wonderful way to check your own writing. So we are talking about code now, and it's something that I was very surprised about. I think this is probably the most surprising insight for me, because that's something that is not discussed in branding community at all. How should we use code? What should you do with code? Maybe with a bit of AI happening, or like AI discussions happening right now, people talk more about in general coding, but it has been there for a while, and it has been it had so many opportunities for a while. And Talia Cotton, who works at Pentagram, shared some of the examples how she very much utilized code in various situations, from building wonderful websites. So this was one of the Google experiments where plastic in the air, basically you could like change all these different parameters on the side, and all these particles change, and all of this obviously is driven by code. And there are like millions of different combinations of the website that you can see based on the day of the time of the day that you go to the website, as well as all the parameters that you change. So obviously that's something I suppose we thought of when we think about coding, because coding and web kind of comes together. But interestingly, coding can be used in branding quite a lot, and is already used in branding quite a lot. And Talia actually shared 8 methods of designing with code. So first is generative, so algorithms that allow designers create things automatically or make them basically generative. Something being personal, so again, personalizing things through the code, making them interactive, making them adaptable, making them live. So when something changes with new data, whether it's day or night, or whether it's some statistics that you pull in, automated, obviously can save us a lot of time as designers, and we already use a lot of automations in all the software that we use to design, but it's also good to think how that can be applied specifically to branding. And obviously it's collaborative, because code is something that can be distributed, that people can interact with. You can also create something very collaborative. Talia said maybe not intelligent yet, so they cannot design for us yet. I want to dive deeper into one of them, which is generative, because I feel like that's probably the one that we've seen the most, and that has been around for the longest time. And I'm sure you've seen one of those identities. So MIT Media Lab was one of the most famous identities that basically had multiple logos. It wasn't one logo, it was very much generative. But since that trend started, there was, I think, Sydney Opera as well. There were like few organizations that started using this kind of generative branding and thinking about how you can kind of create multiple versions of the logo. But the problem was with this particular one is, which one is the logo? And yes, branding people, we love different things, and we can definitely figure out which one we want to use today and which tomorrow. But if we need to send a tax report or something to accountant, or an office manager needs to quickly email something to someone who has nothing to do with design, which one do we pick? And that is a very, very tricky problem that in the second iteration of this project, they actually figure out. They decided that with generative graphic, you do need to pick the main logo. So you can create lots of different options, but you need to pick one that will be the standard that is most used for any sort of default scenarios. And based on that, they also created for MIT Media Lab all the different versions of the logo that were relevant for different departments. And Talia mentioned with a very nice thought that coding is merely just a design tool. So no, I can't design for you, can't make decisions for you, you have to make decisions. So it's up to the designer to design with the code, as with any other tool. So you still have to do your research, you still have to work with clients and understand what they want, and interpret their feedback to go through all this iteration and the process. But it is a tool, and I think it's also probably underutilized tool at the moment. That I think because designers are slightly scared of code, or a lot of designers, maybe it's not utilized enough. But actually, Talia does a lot of her own mini workshops for designers, when in like few hours or few days they can actually learn the basics and suddenly start utilizing it for design. So it's not scary, and definitely it's another tool to put into your toolkit. So if you felt like you need a new approach to branding, then definitely coding could be something new you could try. And the last thing that I want to finish with today is talking about community. Something that I personally feel very passionate about. Obviously, we as Future Learning Academy is all about building communities. But I feel like it's also slightly overutilized word. In general, brands talk about building communities and building movements and all of that. But I feel like with the rise of social media and the way we start interacting more and more online communities became something that brands have to consider. I don't think it can be left out. I think it is happening whether you want it or not. So you better as a brand think about how you're building your community. 70% of global internet users say that most important group they are part of operates online. I would obviously say this probably research slightly biased because it was from Facebook, but still I would say it's a relevant way to think about something. And if I think of my own groups and things that I'm part of, from WhatsApp chats that I'm part of, or any sort of Instagrams that I follow where I feel like there is my tribe that likes the same things, yeah, majority of things are moving online. And definitely with metaverse and all sorts of new trends and the new generation really enjoying being connected online rather than in real life, I feel like that's something that, again, as a brand, we should really think about. So there are 5 things that David Feldman from Social Chain suggested to think about or experiment with if you want to grow community online and you want to try kind of different approaches. So number 1 is building community around a common interest. And the best platform for that, or one of good platform, is Facebook groups. I know they're not maybe as popular as they used to be, but they're still a very, very good place to build a local community if you want to. The example from David was from Lidl, and Lidl is a supermarket here in the UK, and I'm sure in Europe as well. And basically, it's like a discount supermarket. So basically, the whole brand is all about saving money and making the most out of your money. So the Facebook group is all about these recipes and kind of hacks, how you can buy something a little, and again, how can you make the most out of it? And it's a very small group. It's only 5,000 members. I mean, compared to how huge the brand is, it's not necessarily the millions that you would expect from some sort of brand group. But the key point that David made is not about making a huge group. This is a very valuable data point for them to get feedback on things, because these people are already passionate about your brand. Literally, they are posting the content. They're the ones creating it. They want to share it. They feel like the brand is part of their identity, that they're saving money, they're these very smart people who kind of figure out how to do something special with this. So they already love your brand. So they're the best ones to ask any questions or feedback, or see what product does well and what doesn't, and what people say about certain things in your about your brand. So it's really, really good, and it's easy to set up. So to do a Facebook group, you don't need a lot, and especially if it's a small one like that, there is very minimal moderation that you need to do. And very important that brand should act in those groups as a facilitator, not a megaphone. It's not for you to post all the ads and all the updates and all the discounts. It's not about that. It's about curating the community. So you facilitate those discussions, you enable those discussions, you make them happen, but you are not shouting at people in that group, because no one likes to be shouted at. And now the next principle is all about having a reason. And probably the most famous example of building a community around having a reason is the Reddit place. I think it was 2017 when that happened, when Reddit created this board, which everyone could basically put 1 pixel. I forgot, it was maybe in 1 minute, 1 pixel, something every 5 minutes you could put a pixel, something like that. It was the time limit. So obviously, to draw anything with that, you needed a community. And lots of people started building their own mini communities, whether it is to put a flag or your favorite anime character or whatever that you as a community feel passionate about. You wanted to be there to put your pixels on the board. And that is such a powerful thing. And in 4 days, 72 million pixels were placed by over 6 million users. And it's absolutely mad. And I don't know if any of you remember the time, how many discussions were about that. They were like certain communities trying to overtake other people's like mascots, or it's one football team trying to like take over the other football team, whatever there is. There was a real community kind of dynamic happening there, which was quite interesting to watch. So as long as there is a common cause, you can also build an incredible community around it. Another way to build a community and actually collaborate with your community is by crowdsourcing ideas and giving them something special. So this was Reebok's example that allowed, before they launching the shoe, they wanted their followers to actually vote on which one they should produce. And the one that would have the most votes would be produced. Obviously, for a company, that makes total sense. You don't want to produce something no one will buy. But from the community perspective, it's such a powerful thing to say that you are part of building this product. Your vote and your opinion matters. We will produce only what you want, our dear followers, customers, and friends. So that was a very great way to, again, utilize your community and gather them around common interest, common passion, but also give them something they actually want and more likely to buy because they voted for it. On the flip side, you can also use social for very exclusive content. So Instagram has, as you know, private or close friends function where you can select who is in that close friends and then You kind of share content with them only. And actually a lot of brands took that on board and started sharing content only with people who are in the close friends. So you kind of wanted to be this super fan of a certain brand, so you could see some exclusive content that's only shared with those who are very, very dedicated to the brand. Another interesting trend or way to interact with the community is shit posting. So this was KFC, and KFC's Instagram was intentionally bad. And it kind of obviously talking about the whole brand emotion and brand language. I think that kind of very much appropriate for KFC. But it's quite interesting how that obviously created even more interaction, even more engagement. On the flip side, I also think it's very empowering for a social team that you have when you give them freedom to do anything. So if you're not sure about how good everything should be, on social media, the truth is everything exists for whatever, 24 hours. Everyone forgot about it next day. So the key here is not to be afraid to experiment and post something that might resonate, might not. Post it now, delete it later. So I think a lot of brands, again, are too scared and don't only want very polished content on their social, which makes it less authentic, and also people kind of expect everything to be quite raw on social and very quick. So again, there is opportunity to engage with this trend. Another good example of that, of simplicity of raw, is Duolingo. It's actually, I don't know if you know the story, but they obviously they're a language app, and they grew an incredible community on TikTok out of all the platforms. And the whole thing, how they grew it, is through this green owl that is their mascot. But what's interesting about them, talking about experimentation and all the kind of finding the perfect formula, they were experimenting for a very long time. You can see from April to September, basically for half a year, they were just trying things that didn't work. They were trying and trying and trying and trying. It was still green owl. It had slightly different characteristics, so it was like doing something different, and it wasn't working. Like, but they kept trying new content until they found that formula of Duolingo's owl plus trends. So they would always pick whatever TikTok trends of a song or whatever the dance or whatever that is. They would always pick a trend plus funny. Obviously, everyone wants a bit of laugh, and it was very some menacing tone. So it was kind of slightly rude owl. So I think they had like very certain character, and kind of combination of those brought them a success. So they currently have 4.5 million followers, which is mad for an owl, for a language app. So it's not your typical celebrity, but it did work. So final advice from David on building your online community and utilizing social media is prepare to grow slower. Again, right now it's not about numbers anymore. It's like the 100 true fans are much better. They will give you feedback. They will communicate with you. They will engage. They're much better than millions of followers. Important one is also thinking about resource. It does require a lot of time and effort, and I can tell you from our own experience, because our team is incredible and works very hard, but it's a full-time job to actually produce incredible, inspiring content. So before you jump into that, think, okay, how much resource do I have? And therefore, they will influence your strategy, what you can and cannot do on social. You shouldn't release an NFT as a PR stunt. I think this one doesn't need explanation, but yeah, don't follow every single trend you see out there. Be authentic to what your brand represents, and like really pick your battles. And it's also a great opportunity to create a real feedback loops and give ownership in exchange for ideas or data. So again, think what people are getting out of it. So don't think just selfishly about your brand, but also think about your customers, users, your followers. What do they get out of it? So if you're asking them for feedback, what do they get? Do they get products? Do they get something out of it? Something personal, something they can own? And again, how can you give that to them? To finish it off, some books that have been recommended that I'd love to pass on and share with all of you. So if you run out of books to read, these are some for you to spark your inspiration. I definitely recommend Radical Candor. That's the one I did read. All the others are on my list right now to read. So definitely check them out. Thank you so much for joining me for this wonderful session, and never stop learning. And now is the time for your lovely Q&As. So please do put them in the chat below, and I'll start going through them now, and slowly we'll start unpacking and picking the ones to answer, or we'll also have lots of pre-submitted questions that we go through. Also, obviously, talking about social media, feel free to follow us on all the accounts. We are everywhere as Future London Academy. We're on Twitter, London Academy. And if you share insight for today, whatever you found super useful, that will bring me so much joy, because I love seeing what people found insightful, surprising, useful, anything that resonated with people. That really, really gives me a lot of inspiration and energy. So if you felt like something resonated, you feel free to share it and tag us on the social media. And yeah, we'll love to hear from you. If you want to connect personally with me, I'm also on Instagram, but there is not much design happening there. It's mainly life, but hopefully it is inspiring for you guys as well. First question was, as a company grows up, is it important to revisit the branding and grow up with tone and style? And I really like that question, because that's something that we went through as Future London Academy as well. And I think it is totally normal to grow up. There are a lot of parallels between human and brands are very much like humans. They have character, they have behaviors and all of this. And same as humans, they grow up. So especially if you're a startup, when you're starting, I would say you don't even know what you are yet. It's like a newborn baby. You might have certain behaviors and certain aspirations, but you're not fully formed yet. So my biggest advice, do not spend all of your branding budget on the first day that the company started. Like, maybe delay it a little bit when you actually figure out what you stand for, when you get feedback from your audience, when you realize what they actually love about you, and that will really help you fuel what the future of the brand will be. So definitely it's okay to grow up and change your brand as you grow, because as a company you change and the industry changes and people change. What is the future of branding? It's probably number one question that has been submitted. So that is a really good one, because I feel like it's really exciting time for brands. I think that the 60s was the era of advertising, where the madmen with the Cambo ads could like persuade everyone to buy Cambo soup. And that was basically very much about messaging and trying to push a message onto people. Now we are very much in a era of branding, and it's incredible for us as creative, because that's something that we can build more long term and we can think it through. And it's also much better opportunities for creativity, because brands can be applied in all sorts of mediums and scenarios, from digital to physical to metaverse. So what the brands will be in the future, they will be obviously super different in different channels. But one key, I suppose, my personal reflection on where branding is going a lot into what the future branding, I personally think, my personal biased opinion, is all about emotions. And the reason for that is that it used to be about purpose and values, and it very much every brand should have a purpose and should have values and should have behaviors and all of these things. But if I have to pick one key thing that is very important about branding and brands now, it would be emotions. Maybe because we're in an era of TikTok, where everything is 5 seconds and we quickly go through things. And what is the quickest out of values and purpose and everything else? Emotion. Emotion is something we can experience in this second, and next second we'll have a different emotion. So therefore, how people interact with brands is very emotional as well. So they expect brands to portray a certain emotion or give a certain emotion. So if I can give one piece of advice or what to focus in the future of branding, it would be focus on emotion. And then you can expand them to how you want to create those emotions, whether it's with sonic branding, whether it's through language, whether it's motion, or whether it's creating a special space in a Decentraland where you will create the whole brand experience. How do we know if our branding would be effective enough? And that's another wonderful question that could also apply to design in general. How do we know if our design is effective enough? But with branding, it's even more exciting to answer. And the answer to this question is, first, what do we count as effective? And if that's something that you care about, you work with a client and they ask you the question, how do you know if your branding will be effective? Then you need to, from the very beginning, establish what do we mean by effective. Does it mean we'll get 100 million new followers? That constitutes effective for us? Does it mean when we stop people on the streets, they will know what the brand is? Or does it mean people stop thinking we are that and will think we are this? Whatever this thing is, you need to very much quantify what the success looks like before you start building it, because that will very much inform your brand strategy. It will be too late to think about it at the end of like, how was it? I don't know, good. So think about it from the beginning and very much define what metrics you'll be looking at. And unfortunately, some of them will be very difficult to track. And unless you're a huge company who puts a lot of resources on things like brand recognition, and like there are special tools and services that you can use where people go and stop people on the streets and really, really create a lot of data. If you know that won't be the case, then you cannot afford that sort of metrics, then define other metrics that will be relevant. I don't know, you get more engagement on your Instagram, and with all this new brand that you built, maybe that's the most important metric that you wanted because brand exists on social media the most. And one more advice on effectiveness and launching and rebranding is something that I've heard from many agencies, and I could not agree more with that. Pause and breathe when you launch. So the first, depends, 1 month, 2 months, up to half a year will be tough for your brand, especially if you're rebranding something very personal like a football team. People will hate it. People will have all sorts of opinions about how it's much worse than it was before, because they've been fans for probably, 50 years now. So they don't want any change. They want their old brand. So even though you put all your effort and energy as a creative agency to put something incredible together, people will hate it just because it's different. So therefore, you need to warn your clients that, look, when we launch, there will be a lot of hate for like several months. At that point, just don't read comments, just close it. They will come down eventually. And that happens for every single brand. And again, around football clubs, it's quite incredible to see that, because every time an agency rebrands a football club, everyone hates it. After a year, everyone loves it. So it's really about kind of pausing and making sure you don't suddenly change it back and like retrack everything you did in the first few months just because there was a lot of feedback or hate online. Zoe is asking, do you have insights for B2B brands, how to stay authentic yet still professional? A good question. And actually, that is something that keeps coming up a lot in terms of the difference between B2B branding and B2C branding. And I know that's not the answer you probably want to hear, but there is not that much difference, because at the end of the day, it's still a client. So it's still an audience that you're designing for. So if you're designing a brand for a certain audience, so in this case, it's just a business or people working in the business. Again, we always design for humans at the end of the day. So there are humans in the other business who care about this. So you need to understand what this human like, what they expect, all the other things you would usually ask about customers. They are at the end of the day, the customers. Obviously, in B2B, there is more layering in terms of customers. There are people who make decisions and people who actually consume your brand. So there would be, I don't know, if you're Microsoft and try to sell lots of computers, there is a person who makes a purchase order for 1,000 computers, and there is an everyday worker who will be using this computer. So there are two different audiences that you have to consider. But as with any branding, there are audiences, you can research them, you can interview them, you can talk to them, you can understand what they feel, what they want, and build a brand around that. That will be as unique and as special. And definitely don't make B2B more boring than B2C, because there is no reason for it to be more boring. There are humans who actually want something great. Is branding for non-profit different from commercial? Another great comment. And it has its certain differences. I worked with Greenpeace ages ago, and I remember when we went for a meeting with them, their number one, and by the way, in the meeting was Michael Wolff, the founder of Wolff Orleans, myself, and other very, very influential people who knew a lot about branding. And the number one request from Greenpeace: please don't make it look expensive. Please don't make it look like Wolff Orleans designed it or these famous people designed it, because we live on donations. And even though we were doing it for free, so no one was paid. When you work for charities, when you do branding for charities, you're not getting paid majority of the time, or you paid very little. Then still the public opinion will always be that you spend this 500,000 branding, how could you, we donated you our money. So it actually has to be intentionally slightly cheaper looking, which is, again, talking about brand, with anything, it has an audience, it has a purpose. So that's, in this situation, is a purpose in the audience that you're designing for. So therefore you should consider, same as you wouldn't make a discount supermarket look necessarily very luxurious. If you want to attract lots of customers inside, you probably will make it look approachable and simple. It doesn't mean bad, by the way. When I say cheaper or simple, it doesn't mean bad. It means still very, very good, but simpler and maybe more approachable, more friendly, more human, but not screaming luxury. I've recently stepped into design leadership in the tech space. Do you have any advice for leading brand efforts for a B2B brand transitioning into B2C? Oh, interesting. It's a change for me, coming from the agency media space. Raymond, thanks for your question. Transition to B2C, that's a hard one. I'm just trying to imagine that transition. Must be hard on the inside as well. I think if your transition and the audience is changing as anything, if you try to, I don't know, if you had an old brand and you decide to focus on Gen Z out of a sudden, there will be a transition of how you communicate. I think it depends on who is your B2B audience, who is your B2C audience. Are they the same as humans? Are they different as humans? Apply the same principles. There is, like, as I said, you don't need to suddenly kind of change everything completely just because the audience changed. Think of the audience, what they want, what they need, and go from there. It's a hard one. I would say the only other thing that I would alert you about, considering seems like a company transition. With company transitions, be very careful when you brand. Don't do rebranding at the wrong time. If there is a big, I don't know the context of this, but if the company changed their strategy completely, they used to be B2B, they're losing money, they decided to go B2C because that's where the money is, they fired half of the management team, now they have a new management team. If you do rebranding right now, very, very good chance that in a year, the new person will come in and change it again. So don't make any big changes while transition is still happening. And with big internal company transition, it might be a little bit of time. So think of how you can maybe do some minimal changes that will adapt the brand to what you need, but don't do the whole kind of year-long big project only to find yourself with a completely new management team in a year. And again, a new brief that you need to now to work on. What do you think a designer's role will look like in 5-10 years with the rise of AI and other tech automating a lot of traditional workflows? Great question. And I think Talia kind of mentioned a little bit on that in terms of code. Again, and when we say AI, we obviously know it's still versions of automations and still not necessarily automated human. In terms of what the role will change, I think the role of designer changes all the time. I remember when I joined one of the agencies ages ago, there was one creative director there who was in his 60s, and he was saying that anything that is designed on the computer cannot be called design because everything needs to be drawn by pen and paper, on pencil and paper. And he told us wonderful stories about how they used to craft the logos with like tools that are physical, which sounded like a lot of pain. And yeah, you kind of will go through a lot of that. Now, was it better way to design a logo? Now we know definitely not. I think you can create beautiful work in digital tools and software, and it will be potentially even more beautiful if you utilize them smartly. Do the tools mean that your logo definitely will be better than the one you drawn by hand? No, definitely not. You can still create a horrible design on the computer as well as by hand. So the role of designers will evolve. I think we will utilize all the tools available to us, whether it is Midjourney or any other now very popular tools that are out there that can produce creativity. probably will move more and more into art direction and curation. So we will have to select between all these designs. We'll have to curate. And again, even now, when we use any of these tools, we need to put words to produce the designs. Again, how do we decide what the brand stands for and what it represents? There is still a lot of creative thinking comes from it. And another kind of a completely opposite trend, I would say, with anything automated, the always need for craft. Same as like clothing and everything else now is mass produced, and there are lots of brands that do it very cheap. But there is still big market for craftsmanship and, I don't know, crafted leather goods. Are they more popular than, I don't know, Zara's and Topshops of the UK? You can't really pick. It's just people will prefer, some prefer the craftsmanship that takes time and is more expensive and it has a different feel. And maybe to a lot of people, you won't see the difference between the bag that has been crafted by hand versus that was manufactured. But there always is if you're really into crafts and if you want to stay true to whatever your process is, there will be space for you as well. Maybe it will be smaller, maybe it will be different, but I think certain things will always find its audience. And how do you see branding playing a role in the metaverse, and what tools should designers and agencies should be using? That's a great one, because metaverse, I think, is really, really exciting. And I'll tell you why. So you probably heard the comparison between metaverse and internet, that it's literally just another medium. And when internet appeared, no one knew what to do with it. If you know the history of internet, people did all sorts of things on the internet that don't exist anymore. And majority of companies that were created at the beginning of internet and search engines and websites, they don't exist anymore, which is normal. I think when something new appears, people experiment to trying to figure out what can we actually use it for. So I think metaverse now in this space where people are just creating lots of things, but we don't know what will work out, what we'll use it for, how we'll use it for. But one thing is for certain, that it gives much more immersive experience. And obviously as a brand, that's what you want. You want someone to be connected to your brand in 360 and feel it with every cell of your body if you can. So there will be more opportunities for brands to create experiences and create something different. What it will look like, it's difficult to say, because what we know from the history of replicating what existed in one medium and just like putting it exactly like it is in a new medium doesn't work. Saying that, the versions of each thing that exists will always exist. Books were printed, now we have online books, we have audiobooks. Books did not disappear, they changed the way we interact with them. So the same way there will be certain things that we interact with brands, so there will be experiences, there will be products, there will be like from brands. This just will be different. If only I knew the future, I would do something about it. What makes a timeless brand? Oh, that's another $1 million question. It's an interesting question, especially in fashion. I've seen it happening a lot when all the Burberrys of the world changed their logo to very kind of geometric fonts and simplified the whole graphics, and everyone's like, Burberry is all about history, how could you do this? The truth is, fashion, for example, is a representation of time. So like Chanel might be a very old brand, but always produce something in terms of like the way they produce it, the way like the sustainability, all the aspects will be different depending on when they're producing it and the customers they produce it for. So it makes sense that the brands themselves change with time as well. So do brands need to stay timeless? It's a good question. An opposite example of that would be a story from wonderful Michael Wolff, the founder of Wolff Olins, very, very dear friend of mine, who designed probably every single logo you can touch. And one of the logos he didn't design is for golden syrup. I don't know if any of you from the UK, there is this liquid thingy called golden syrup, basically it's sugar syrup. It's in a can, tin can, and it has very distinct design with a lion, and there are flies. It's not very logical what's on the tin. I mean, it has a story behind it. But basically, the company came to Michael Wolff and said, "Can you please redesign? We look old." He thought about it. And he said, "You know what would be the best redesign for you? No redesign." And he didn't redesign it because it did stand for very much kind of this old traditional thing, and that's what it still looks like. And I think there is a beauty in that. So some things need to look old and need to look kind of quite historic. Doesn't make them timeless. I don't know. But yeah, I don't have an answer how to create a timeless brand. But I think you need to question first, do you want to be timeless, or do you want to be walk within the time and change within the time and be modern and change with the audience and the world? Where do you find inspiration? Oh, my favorite question. Of course, I will say follow Future Learning Academy on our Instagram. But in general, also find inspiration elsewhere. The best advice is always go away from your computer. Go to the museums, go to the nature. Nature is incredible. Like if you start just looking at how everything designed in nature, you can find like unlimited inspiration for design. But also look at things that are not connected to what you're designing. If like cars, I don't know, furniture, fashion, movies, go see a beautiful movie. Like that will inspire you so much, because I think movies, especially like really good ones, have like unlimited source of inspiration, because the amount of craftsmanship and effort they put in the movie is incredible, and there are so many talented people that work on each of them. There is always always great place for inspiration. So do something that doesn't involve computer. Good one. Are you doing something just for yourself and not for clients? What is it, and what gives you energy in hard times? Obviously that I mean, my client is Future Learning Academy, so that's my life. But in terms of do I do anything outside of that gives energy, is 100% yes answer. And those of you who might have seen me at OFF know that I am obsessed with hobbies. So something that I started ages ago is a 30 hobbies project, when I decided to try 30 hobbies in 30 weeks. And basically I was trying any random thing that I've never tried before. And that was incredible. I tried flying trapeze, playing drums, floating thingy. I took helicopter driving lessons, all sorts of random things. And that gave me so much energy. So now we started with a friend, and we're now continuing for season 2 because it was just so much fun. And I definitely learned so much about myself, learning, definitely got a lot of inspiration and parallels between different things that I just never thought of before. And if you're planning to do that very wild thing, what helped me is the 3 criteria. So one is that it should be something I've never tried before. Second, I cannot be skeptical. So it can't be like, I'm not sure I'll enjoy it, because that's what was stopping me my entire life with trying all the new things. It's like, not my thing. But if you try all of your not things, that's where you find the most inspiration, because that's something you haven't actually done. So you'll find a lot of new insights there. And the third one for me was it can't be on Zoom. So I love Zoom because I can connect to humans in Madrid and Mexico and everywhere, but also it's good to get outside and get fresh air. So if you can do something in person, do it, try it, and you'll find a lot of inspiration. Nakit is asking, I struggle with color selection for my designs. How do you approach selecting your colors for your designs? Well, actually, we have, in a few weeks, we have a webinar coming up from Design Studio, or ex-Design Studio rather, Campbell Butler from Love Work. Now, he will talk actually about how he moves from kind of the initial concept to very much visual style. So he will dive into all the things, how he selects things. So I would recommend that, because I feel like it's not a 1-second answer, but it's a good question that definitely should be explored. And I feel like everyone has a slightly different way. When presenting, how do you reveal the identity to the client? Is there a build up to that important slide? How do you think about it? presenting to clients is such an interesting topic, and give an emoji if you struggle with presentations, because we are thinking that maybe it's something that we should cover more in terms of how to present to clients and how to win work for if you are a founder of a creative agency or you're freelancing and try to get more work, because it is interesting how it changed in terms of how you pitch. I suppose the old school was exactly that presentation. You get the brief, you meet the client, you go away for whatever, a few months, and then it's like, ta-da, here's what I produced in my cave, and I think this is the best design ever. The problem with that, it's a big shock to the client system, because it's something they've never seen before, so it can go either way. Majority of agencies now, and if you work for any agency, I'm sure you're following similar process of actually involving client a lot from the very beginning to the very end. So there is no big reveal, there is constant collaboration. Now, there is a big difference between asking client, what do you think? Should we do it red or should we do it yellow? That's not the point of collaboration. Collaboration means getting them involved into thinking, getting the right insights from them about the company, about the customers, because that's what they know. So from the very beginning, you can kind of plan this series of workshops, let's say every week. Again, depends on how big the project is, how big the client is, and from actually creating a brief together and understanding, why are we doing rebranding? Like, what exactly are we trying to do? And why now? Like, why not a year ago? Why not next year? What exactly are we doing today and what we're trying to achieve? And again, collaborating on that. And there are many different ways you can run those workshops, to like continuing with kind of different iteration and focusing on different aspects, to the point where, again, by the time you actually present the design, the client has been following this journey with you and has been involved with all the process. So A, they'll love it more because they've been involved. B, it's more likely that it will get approved because they've seen versions and iteration of it. They've seen where it's going. So again, they have always an opportunity to kind of course correct throughout. We have a course on branding that covers a lot about how the process works and what you present at each stage, called Branding Now. Again, I'm sure a lot of you already seen the course. So if that's something you're interested in, I would definitely recommend. How to create a strong brand identity. I think that actually wraps up very nicely what we discussed today in the overall, like going from strategy to all the different elements. You need to start with a strategy. With any brand identity, I think you need to understand, again, why you're doing what you're trying to achieve and kind of figure out the process. And that will create a really good brand identity. If you want a really strong brand identity, then definitely all the other layers that we discussed, from building a brand language that will resonate with people, to using motion. You can also use sonic branding and other things that will all make your brand strong and stronger. But it has to stand on a strong foundation of strategy. So you do need to crystallize what your brand stands for, whether you crystallize it in 3 words or in any sort of different shape or style. Some people do it as a manifesto. You write a manifesto for your brand, and again, that's what kind of shows what the brand stands for. So you need to have strong strategy, and then you need to work on that strategy to develop really good visual style. And then you need to actually include all the different elements that can make your brands even stronger, whether it is building communities, whether it is using motion design, or building a brand language. So that would make your brand stronger. Thanks so much for joining, and hopefully you found that useful. And yeah, until next time, and never stop learning. Bye.